Hello, my friends. This is Lindy. Welcome to another Friday Reads. Wow, it's been a busy week. My most exciting news is that my garden, which had been nominated for Edmonton's Front Yards in Bloom, has won third place in the Natural Gardens category. Front Yards in Bloom. Yeah, I was so happy I cried. There's a lot of emotion involved there because I've had to battle the city in the past about my unusual front yard. Anyway, I also went one day to the Fringe Theatre Festival with my friend Kathy. We saw two shows. One was called Nakota and Rocco by an Indigenous storyteller, Josh Lungdock, and I really liked that. The venue was at the French language campus of the University of Alberta. It's called the Faculté Saint-Jean. And there was a sign on the door, Ici on vit en français, and that is applicable to one of the books I'm going to be talking about later, if I remember to mention it. And the other show that we saw is Epidermis Circus, some kind of spicy puppet cabaret. It was fantastic. What is her name? Ingrid Hansen, who uses a mirror and a camera to project herself really big on screen, and makes just things with her fingers, with her breast. Oh yeah, it was so good. Loved it. What else did I do? I picked the last of the raspberries in my raspberry patch. Didn't have as many this year as last year. I didn't pick any Saskatoons from my bushes this year. The birds got most of them. Well, I guess I ate a few off the bush here and there, but I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 Saskatoon bushes. Anyway, birds got most of them. My sweetie did buy a Saskatoon pie from our local bakery, so I enjoyed that. I also started a batch of spruce cone syrup, and it's fermenting right now. I haven't tried making this before, so see how it goes. But this year there were just so many cones, and I could see them dripping resin. I got to do something with that gorgeous spruce flavor. So fingers crossed. It's probably going to be a month or so before it's ready, so stay tuned. I also finished preparing for the natural dye workshop that I'm going to be teaching in mid-September. I spent an entire day doing the wool fabric and alpaca wool yarn, including extras that I'm going to be using myself. Yeah, well, that feels good. That part is all done. And today is the final day for preparing for our open house art show and sale that is happening tomorrow. So I can give you a little sneak preview. I got my bedroom tidied. I don't have enough bookshelves. I've mentioned before, I don't normally hang on to books, but books that I haven't read yet, and in some cases there are books that I love so much and I know I want to reread, so I keep those. Here's the yellow room, which is what I call my workroom, my sewing room, and it's got tall bookshelves, mostly that hold my craft and natural dye supplies, and also my fiber and textile reference books. I've got another lower shelf that has my foreign language reference books and lots of photo albums, you know, stuff like that. Odds and ends. My books aren't sorted very well, but I know what's where, so that's the main thing, right? Okay, let's get to the books because the light keeps coming through the trees and I'm just gonna try and stay out of it here. I read 6 books this week. 2 of them have queer content, and I'm going to try really hard to mention it because last week I read 2 books with queer content that I didn't even mention when I was talking about them, and I know many of you are interested in books that have queer content. So the 2 last week were Daughters of the Deer and Blue Skin Gods, have significant queer content. I'll put those titles down below. I also read 2 that are eligible for the Giller Prize, so my ongoing Shadow Giller project, and 2 nonfiction, and 3 by Irish authors, and 3 of the books that I read were actually audiobooks. So, as usual, I'm going to save the best for last, and I'm going to start with a 4-star book, The Broken Places by Frances Peck. And this one is set in Vancouver, and there's a major earthquake. So we follow the lives of, or what happens over a few days, to about 7 different characters. There's a gay couple who've been together for 5 years. Things are not going well between Joe, who's a gardener, has his own business, and Kyle, who's a cosmetic surgeon. We've got Anna, who's a full-time caregiver from the Donbass region of Ukraine, and she has come to Canada to look after Miss Dodie, a rich elderly white woman who is in a certain, it doesn't say what she's got, but obviously some kind of dementia. And then 3 members of this rich family in North Vancouver. Tane has got a multi-million-dollar tech company, and his wife is Charlotte. Their marital relationship is not good, and their daughter Sydney is a teen, about 15 I think, and she is recovering from substance abuse. So those are the characters. Lots of action and lots of character development, and then they're all interacting with each other. There is a restaurant-sized chandelier in this million-dollar mansion, and you can imagine what happens, earthquake. Well, strangely, last week I read a story that had a giant chandelier and a woman with a death wish that kept hoping it would fall on her head. So, where's that coming from? Oh yeah, and there's a Tim Hortons reference in here. I added it to my collection. If you want to, if you haven't already checked out my blog with Tim Hortons references in literature, I'll link it down below. I also finished reading this vegetarian cookbook, One Pot Pan Planet, by the English food writer Anna Jones, and I'm going to be doing a separate review of this, but I'll just say that she was inspired by dishes from all around the world, but you know, as she says herself, they are wildly inauthentic, but you know, flavors from everywhere. So that's all I'll say for now. More to come on this. Watch for a separate review if you're interested in cookbooks. Oh, this light. I don't know. I tried moving, but the light is coming through the trees. It's supposed to go up to 32 degrees today, so I'm trying to get this done early. Okay, just have to put up with that impressionistic light effect. So I'm going to tell you about a popular science audiobook, The Joy of Sweat. It's by Sarah Everts, and the audiobook is read by Sophie Amoss. You can tell that Everts is really passionate about the topic of perspiration, and it is fascinating. There are so many interesting things. Like, I didn't know that humans are among very few species that have sweat glands, and without them our bodies would overheat and we would die. So you know, the alternative, there are some animals like elephants use their ears to cool off, and a camel's nose is its refrigeration unit for its brain, and she explains how that works. Vultures poop on themselves, other birds vomit on themselves, dogs pant. You know, those are the other options for cooling your body. Some people have colorful sweat. Like, she talks about this nurse who had red sweat that kept staining her white clothes. And there are people who have hyperhidrosis, where they sweat so much that they're constantly wet, and it affects what kind of jobs they can take. So for example, if you soak through your clothes and you're in a professional kind of job where you're wearing a suit, you would have to have a lot of extra suits to change into. And you know, you can't hold a pen because it keeps slipping out of your hand because it's so wet, you know, that sort of thing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who are born without sweat glands, and that's a major problem too. So, oh yeah, so many interesting things about sweat, the science of it, but also there's cultural information, and there's a whole chapter on antiperspirants. Yeah, good stuff. And another audiobook that I listened to is Antarctica, a collection of stories by Keegan. So this is her debut. I think it came out in 1999, and I picked it up because I loved small things like these. Now, it's a strong debut, but I initially gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. I was disappointed, but then I upped that to 4 stars because these stories stayed with me, and I realized that I was being harsh because of my expectations, and expectations based on small things like these. So why 3 stars? Also, the subject matter on a lot of the stories has to do with marital infidelity, and that's a subject that a topic that I'm just not that interested in fiction. And 2 of the stories open with listeners' advisories for highly offensive language. Those 2 stories are set in the southern US, and I wish I would not have listened to those, actually. And not only because of the offensive language. So part of it is because it's dated, and I think, and it's more offensive now than it was then, but also because the author is Irish, and she's writing in the voice of these Southerners, U.S. Southerners, and maybe there's a bit of awkwardness or something. It's something a bit forced about it anyway. Both of them are crime stories. Yeah, I wish I would have just skipped those. The rest of them, especially the ones that are set in Ireland, so mostly in rural or small village Ireland, are really atmospheric and really focus on the characters, and they're just great. They're really good. The audiobook production, by the way, is new. It's Highbridge, came out in 2022. That's the one that I listened to. And there are 4 different narrators, so it switches up between the 14 different stories. So that's kind of nice too for an audio production. Okay, I've had to move to an entirely different part of the garden. That sun was just getting to be too much. So next up, another Irish author, Emma Donoghue, and her book Haven, which has just come out. Emma Donoghue was born in Ireland, but now lives in Canada. She moved here a couple decades ago, so we call her Canadian. And this one is eligible for Canada's Giller Prize. So anything by Emma Donoghue, you can expect that there will be some queer content. But I don't want to give spoilers, so that's as much as I will say about it, about that aspect of it. It is set in the year 600, and it follows 3 monks who take a carrack, one of those round boats, across to this island on the off the west coast of Ireland, based on a true place, Skellig Michael, which has had a monastery since about that time. Now, so it's mostly a survival story, as well as a story about religion and belief and power, how far a person is willing to go for their religious beliefs, and at what point is it madness? Yeah. For such a barren place, there's one tree, a little stunted one. It's amazing that people can survive there, but it is covered in birds, including auks. There is a whole book about the great auk by Jan Thornhill in picture book format that I highly recommend. And puffins, kittiwakes, cormorants, you know, birds like that. I was reminded of Geraldine McCaughrean's novel, Where the World Ends. It's set in the St. Kilda string of islands off the coast of Scotland. And that one is also based on a true story about a group of men and boys who are dropped off on this sea stack for birding. So they gather a bunch of eggs and birds, and then they bring them back to their home island, but nobody comes to pick them up. So they're stuck there, and how they survive. A much more thrilling telling of a similar story. Yeah, it was just interesting to compare the two. I like them both about equally, I guess. But it was really interesting to be reading this book the same week that I read The Colony by Audrey Magee. Now, that was the best book that I've read all week. And it was actually audio, read by Stephen Hogan. Stephen Hogan also did the audio for John Boyne's The Heart's Invisible Furies, by the way. And so The Colony is set in 1979. It's an Irish island that's not named, but it seems like it's sort of like the Aran Islands off the Bay of Galway. Like the Skellig in Haven, there are no trees, so it's a tough existence. There's a quote in The Colony: "In other places with trees and shelter, the baseness of life is easier to disguise, to dress up as something more elaborate than it really is." And that really rings true for the Haven as well, where these 3 monks in the Haven are, you know, down to bare necessities. And in The Colony, so that one, if you haven't heard the basic premise of the story, there are 2 outsiders that come to spend the summer on the island. One is an Englishman, a painter, and the other is a Frenchman who is a linguist. And that's what I was going to mention about the sign that I saw at Collège Saint-Jean about "Here we speak French." And the reason for that sign is because without using the language, and in a majority English-speaking city like Edmonton, it is easy to just switch to English and not use French. So the same thing is happening on the island, where it's majority Irish speakers, except they're using more and more English. The children go to school off island and learn English, and that's where the jobs are. And so a traditional way of life is being lost. And there's major conflict between the Frenchman and the Englishman, having to do with what they need for their work. And at the same time, sort of in between each chapter, there are news reports of deaths of either the IRA or the Ulster forces. So 1979, many people died, both on the Catholic side and the Protestant side. And so these news reports are coming over the radio on the island. And that's very much a counterpoint to what is happening in the novel. It is I would say a bleak or kind of bitter story, not bittersweet. And it really hit me in the heart. I really, really liked it. I also liked that technique of having the true life reports informing the fiction parts. And it reminded me of how John Elizabeth Stintsey used that in My Volcano, which was set in 2016. And in between chapters, there are reports of deaths, like police shootings or racist-related deaths of Black and Indigenous and queer individuals in the US and Canada. And also the trees, which I read last week. The cover of the trees, the edition that I read by Grey Wolf Press, in faint writing, there's the names of mostly men who were lynched. And in the novel itself, there's one chapter that's just all names and these people actually did die of lynching, or the woman in the story who's keeping a record of all of these lynchings, she's got over 7,000 of them, is also including police shootings of black men. Anyway, I like how these true life, very sad facts add such poignancy, and they give us another way to think about what's happening in the world. And art can do that too. It can provide commentary and insight on this world that we're living in. All right, well, that's enough from me, and as always, I would love to hear from you. Any comments that you have. What do you think of these books if you've read them? And do you like having true life stuff mixed in with your fiction? You know, what are your thoughts on that? Thanks for watching. See you next time.